On a hillside above the village of Leskovik, a shepherd ducks into a concrete bunker the size of a refrigerator. And hangs his canvas bag from a hook that was drilled into the wall in 1979. The country has 173,000 of them, built between 1967 and 1986. In Tirana, a window opens on the 4th floor of an apartment block painted in cobalt and ochre. The blocks were repainted under a program begun by Edi Rama as mayor. Grey tenements turned deliberately into colour. On the Adriatic coast at Vlorë, a plaque above the harbour names a date: the 7th of March, 1991, when 25,000 Albanians left this port in 6 days for the Italian shore. This is Albania, not the country 40 years sealed behind a one-man regime, and not yet the country its young people are deciding it should be. Albania declared itself atheist by law for 41 years, the only country in Europe to do so. One-fifth of its people now live abroad. 4 faiths returned the day that law was lifted. What follows is daily life in a country still deciding which parts of its history to keep. The country has more concrete than the country has people. 3.5 million bunkers were planned. 173,000 were built. They are the size of 2 telephone booths set together, with a domed roof and a small entrance facing inward, away from the assumed direction of attack. They were poured between 1967 and 1986 under Enver Hoxha, the man who ruled Albania for 40 years and feared invasion from every direction. None ever came. What did come was the late 1980s, then 1990, then the regime's collapse. The bunkers stayed where they were. They were too solid to remove and too strange to forget. So the country found them other uses. The shepherd above Leskovik in the southwest uses his bunker as a tool shed and a place to wait out the rain. In Berat, a couple has converted one along the river road into a wine bar with 3 stools and a single bottle shelf. In Tirana, 2 of the larger ones, the underground command bunkers built for the regime's leadership, have been opened as museums. Bunk art. One sits on the eastern edge of the city, a 5-story complex of corridors and offices that the public was not permitted to know existed until 2014. Bunk art 2 is in the center of Tirana, a few minutes walk from Skanderbeg Square. School children visit on weekday mornings. The square itself is roughly a hectare. It was redesigned in 2017. The perimeter widened, the cars removed, the central plaza paved in stone, collected from every district of the country. At its center stands the bronze of Gjergj Kastrioti, known as Skanderbeg, on horseback, raised in 1968 in honor of the 15th century military commander who held off Ottoman armies for 25 years before his death in 1468. The statue weighs 9 tons. Its base is gabbro from the Mat River. Above the square, on its south side, the National History Museum is fronted by a mosaic mural 7 meters high and 24 meters wide. It was completed in 1981 and depicts a procession of Albanians from antiquity to the Hoxha era, marching forward together with rifles and banners. The mosaic remained in place after 1990. It has not been altered. A few streets east of the square stands the Pyramid. It was built in 1988 as a mausoleum for Hoxha, designed by his daughter and son-in-law, and opened to the public a year before the regime ended. After 1991, it served as a NATO operations center, then a television station, then an abandoned shell that teenagers climbed for the view. In 2018, the city government decided not to demolish it. Between 2018 and 2023, it was reopened instead as Tumo Tirana, a free coding and creative technology school for teenagers, run on the model first developed in Yerevan. The interior staircases were rebuilt. The exterior was kept. Children climb it now with permission. Two kilometers west of the pyramid runs Rruga e Kavajës, where the regime's 6-story concrete tenements still house most of central Tirana's population. Beginning in 2000, in his first term as mayor, Edi Rama, a painter before he was a politician, began ordering the blocks repainted. The first repaints were on the central blocks, in cobalt and ochre and pink and lime, one building at a time. Within 5 years, dozens of blocks across the center had been turned into color. The plumbing did not change. The heating did not change. But on weekday mornings in October, when the sun is low, the painted blocks throw red and green and yellow rectangles onto the pavements below. A boy in a grey school uniform leans out of one of those windows. He pulls his bag onto his shoulder, looks across at the pyramid 1 block over, and disappears back inside. The bunker, the statue, the mosaic, the pyramid, the painted blocks. The country has not removed any of them. The country has put them to different uses. By 8:30, the call to prayer at the Etembe Mosque on the square has begun. In November 1967, Albania declared itself an atheist state. The decree had been preceded that spring by a campaign that closed every mosque, every church, every Bektashi prayer house, and every Catholic seminary in the country. By the end of that May, there were 2,169 religious buildings out of use. Some were demolished, some became basketball halls, some became warehouses. The reason was not that Hoxha disliked religion. It was that he could not tolerate any rival source of authority in a country he had spent 2 decades sealing from outside influence. Faith was a competing state. The state did not permit it. For 41 years, formal religious practice was a criminal offense. Clergy were imprisoned. More than 200 priests, imams, and Bektashi Babas died in detention or were executed. On the 18th of January 1991, 2 months after the regime announced reform, and a year before the country's first multi-party election, the gates of the Et Hembe Mosque on Skanderbeg Square in Tirana were opened. About 10,000 people had gathered in the square. The mosque had not held a service since 1967. A man unrolled a prayer mat onto the cold stone floor, and the first prayer in 24 years began. The mosque is small. It dates from 1789 and is one of the few buildings in central Tirana still in 18th century form. Its frescoes, landscapes of trees and rivers and houses painted on the inside walls, are unusual in Islamic religious art and survived the closure because the building had been used as a state museum during the atheist period. The frescoes were not destroyed. The walls were not whitewashed. A few hundred meters southeast of the square, the Resurrection Cathedral was consecrated in 2012. It is one of the largest Orthodox cathedrals in the Balkans. Its bell tower rises 46 meters. The mosaic above the central altar shows the resurrected Christ, and the candles below it are lit by visitors at any time of day. A woman in her 70s places a thin yellow candle in the sand tray at the entrance. She crosses herself. She does not stay long. Tirana also holds the Bektashi World Headquarters. The Bektashi are a Sufi tradition that arrived in the Balkans in the 15th century, were for a time the spiritual home of the Janissary Corps of the Ottoman Empire, and were banned in Turkey by Ataturk in 1925. In that year, the order's central seat was moved from Hacı Bektaş in central Anatolia to Tirana. Albania has been the Bektashi World Center ever since. The headquarters in Tirana sits on a hill in a complex of low stone buildings. Where the dervish ceremonies, with their slow circular dance and wide white skirts, are still performed at the equinoxes. The country today is roughly 56% Sunni Muslim, 2% Bektashi, 10% Catholic, and 7% Orthodox Christian, with the remainder unaffiliated, atheist, or unstated. 4 faiths returned to Albania the moment the law was lifted, and the country took them back without conflict. Albanians often say their religion is Albanianism, that the faith they practice is shared by their neighbor and their cousin and their employer, who all belong to different ones. By the time the candle in the cathedral has burned an inch, the morning ferry on Lake Komani, 200 kilometers north of Tirana, is already an hour out from the dock at Koman. The first ferry of the day on Lake Komani leaves the dock at 6:30. The lake is not a lake. It is the impounded gorge of the Drin River, dammed in 1985 for hydroelectric power, and now the only practical route into the far northern villages. The boat is 40 meters long. It carries a dozen cars and a few hundred passengers. The crossing takes about 3 hours and runs between mountain walls that close to 100 meters apart in places. The water is olive green. The cliffs above it are vertical until they are not. At the northern end of the run lies the village of Fiersa, and beyond Fiersa, the road climbs into the Albanian Alps. These are the mountains the country calls the Accursed Mountains, and they hold the highest peaks in the southern Balkans. The pass into Theth crests at 1,700 meters. The village below it is a scatter of stone-roofed houses on a meadow ringed by limestone walls. A house in Theth, built in 1892, has its summer kitchen on the lower floor and its winter rooms on the upper. The same family has lived in it since the year of its building. The walls are dry-laid stone, 1/2 meter thick. The roof is the original slate. In late October, the family begins moving its dairy goats down from the high pasture, and the kitchen on the lower floor is in use again from dawn until dark. Smoke rises from the chimney. The kettle on the iron stove is for raki. A village of this kind was not, in any operational sense, reachable by the regime. The road from Fiersa was not paved until after 1990. The communist state could send conscription orders into Theth. It could not, in practice, send much else. The village kept its kitchens. It kept its weddings. It kept the building cycle of its houses. When the regime ended, the village was found still doing what villages of this kind had been doing for 400 years. The same is true of Valbona, on the other side of the pass. The 2-day walk from Theth to Valbona crosses ridges at 2,000 meters and drops into a valley of poplar groves and shepherd huts. In the autumn, the transhumance route brings sheep down from the high pasture to the wintering grounds further south. A shepherd in his 60s walks the verge of the dirt road with 80 animals and a single dog. He sleeps in a hut that is 2 centuries old. He eats bread that he baked the day before. What kept the mountain villages largely undisturbed is partly that they were too steep, too remote, and too difficult to administer, and partly that they had a code of their own. The Kanun of Leke Dukagini, codified in the 15th century by the prince whose name it carries, organized every transaction of mountain life into formal categories: the household, the marriage, the property line, the blood debt, the duty of hospitality. Its central concept was the pledge. A pledge once given could not be broken. A guest under one's roof could not be harmed. A debt of blood once entered had to be ended by a recognized ceremony and could not be ignored. The Kanun was technically illegal in 1944 when the regime came to power. In practice, in the high mountain villages, it remained, quietly, discreetly, and with adjustments the regime preferred not to look at: the working law. The Kanun was also the source of one of the most singular practices in the country: the sworn virgin women of the high mountains. A woman in a household with no male heirs could declare herself a man, take a male name, wear male clothing, run the household's affairs, and inherit. The vow was permanent. It was witnessed by the village elders. The number of these women at any one time was small, but the practice survived through the regime's decades and into the present, and a handful of them in the northern villages still hold the title in their 70s and 80s. Further east, where the Drin leaves the lake and runs to the sea, sits the city of Shkodër. Above it stands Rozafa Castle, on a hill where Illyrian fortifications were laid down in the 4th century before the Common Era. The castle holds the Albanian legend of the walled-in mother. 3 brothers building the walls of the fortress find their work undone every morning until they agree to seal alive whichever of their 3 wives brings their lunch the next day. And when the youngest brother's wife arrives, she is sealed into the wall, asking only that her right breast and her right hand be left exposed, so she can still nurse her infant son and stroke his hair. The legend is told all over the southern Balkans. In Albania, the wife is named Rozafa. South of Shkodër, the road climbs to Kruja. The town wraps a hillside crowned by the castle of Gjer Kastrioti, known as Skanderbeg, who held off Ottoman armies in this fortress for 25 years, between 1443 and his death in 1468. The bazaar below the castle has been in continuous trade since the 15th century. The stallholders sell raki in bottles and herbal teas in cloth bags and copper coffee pots stamped with a double-headed eagle. Skanderbeg's helmet is in the museum at the top of the hill. It is silver, with a crowned goat's head above the brow. Not every part of the country was permitted to outlast the regime. By the late 1980s, the rationing system that had fed Albania for 4 decades was no longer functioning. Bread was distributed by ticket. Cooking oil was distributed by ticket. The tickets were not always honored. Hoxha had died in 1985. His successor, Ramiz Alia, attempted reforms, But the underlying problem could not be reformed. The state had spent 40 years sealing the country off, economically, diplomatically, intellectually, from any source of correction, and the closures were beginning to be visible from inside. In late 1990, the country's first multi-party elections were announced. By February 1991, the Hoxha statue in Skanderbeg Square had been pulled from its plinth. 2 weeks later, on the 7th of March, freighters in the harbour at Vlorë began to fill. People walked onto them with the clothes they had on. By the end of the day, 25,000 Albanians had boarded vessels that were not built for passengers. The boats made the 80-kilometer crossing to the Italian port at Brindisi. The Italian authorities did not at first know what to do. Some were granted refuge. Many were sent back. A second exodus in August 1991 sent another 20,000 from the port at Durrës to Bari. The reason people left was the reason the regime had spent 40 years preventing them from leaving. There was nothing to eat, nothing to do, and no remaining belief that there ever would be. What had kept them until the last weeks was the Sigurimi, the state security service, founded in 1944 and dissolved in 1991, ran an internal surveillance apparatus that at its peak ran one of the densest internal surveillance networks in the Eastern Bloc, with informants reportedly placed inside most extended families. A neighbor, a colleague, a cousin could be reporting on the people they knew best. Letters were opened, phone calls were transcribed. The penalty for an attempted border crossing was internment for the person who tried, and frequently for their parents and siblings as well. Internment was served at one of the camps the regime maintained in the inland mountains. The largest of them, Spac, in the Merdita district, held political prisoners between 1968 and 1991 in the buildings of a working copper mine. The camp's records, opened after the regime, named thousands of political prisoners over the camp's 23 years. The writer Ismail Kadare, who lived in Tirana through almost the entire regime and described internal exile in his fiction more clearly than any historian has, said in a 2017 interview that the Albanian writer's task under Hoxha was to write as if the regime did not exist, knowing that it did, and to leave a record that would be readable when the regime no longer did. Kadare died in 2024. His house in Gjirokastër is now open to visitors. In the harbour at Vlorë today, the wooden fishing boats are back at the slipway by 7:30. A man in his 60s draws a folded net into his arms with the slow patience of someone who has done it for 40 years. Behind him, the memorial to the 1991 departure is a small stone tablet with the date and the number. Most of the people who left then have not returned. Their grandchildren are now in Italian schools, German schools, American schools. Roughly 1 in 5 of all Albanians lives abroad. In Tirana, at Mother Teresa Airport, named for the Skopje-born nun whose family was Albanian, the morning departure board lists Milan, Frankfurt, London, Athens. A woman in her 30s sits at gate 4 with a sleeping child in her lap. The child has not yet learned the language of the country they are flying to. The Adriatic at evening looks the same as the Adriatic in the morning, looking south. Berat sits on either side of the Osum River, 250 kilometers south of Tirana. The Illyrian fortifications above the town date to the 4th century before the Common Era, and the city has been called the City of 1,000 Windows for as long as anyone has bothered to count. The white Ottoman houses on the steep north slope are stacked one above the other, and each story's south wall is glass. The windows belong to the same building cycle as the bunker doors and the painted apartment blocks of Tirana. But the windows were here first, and the windows have outlasted the regime that left the bunkers behind. Berat was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2008. Two hours drive south, the town of Gjirokastër climbs a hillside in stone roofs. The houses are roofed with split limestone tiles laid like fish scales, a building technique unique to this part of the southern Albanian highlands. The town was the birthplace of Enver Hoxha in 1908, and his childhood home is now a museum. 40 minutes east of the center stands the Ottoman Bazaar, in continuous trade since the 17th century, where coppersmiths still hammer raki stills and serving trays under daylight that has not changed color in 300 years. Gjirokastër was inscribed by UNESCO in 2005. The road south from Gjirokastër drops to the coast at Saranda, where the Adriatic gives way to the Ionian. The water clears as the road descends. Saranda's harbour faces Corfu, 8 kilometers across the strait, and the ferries cross every 2 hours in summer. A few kilometers further south, in a lagoon between the road and the sea, lies Butrint. The site holds Greek temples from the 5th century before the Common Era, a Roman-era theatre, a Byzantine baptistry, and a Venetian tower above the lagoon. UNESCO inscribed Butrint in 1992, the country's first World Heritage Site. The walls of the baptistry still hold a mosaic floor of birds and fish. A heron stands in the shallows where the Roman harbour used to be. Just below Butrint, the village of Ksamil sits at the edge of 3 small islands close enough to swim to. The water in the bay is the colour the postcards always show. A returning son, who left for Italy in 1992 and came back to open a guest house 2 years ago, sits at a low table on the terrace with his daughter. The morning birek, a flaky pastry of cheese and spinach, is on a tray between them. There is a glass of raki next to her coffee. He is teaching her the family recipe. In Tirana, in a cafe off the New Bazaar, a woman from Hamburg orders an Albanian coffee and reads the menu in the local script. The waiter brings her a glass of cold water, the way the country has served its coffee since long before the regime. Albania applied for European Union membership in 2009 and was granted candidate status in 2014. EU accession negotiations opened in 2022. The first generation of children whose parents came back from abroad is now in primary school. Above the bay at Ksamil, a flag flies on a low rise. The black, double-headed eagle on a red ground has not changed in 500 years. The country it flies over has changed almost everything else.
The bunker is not the one above Leskovik. It is somewhere further south, on a low rise above a sheep pasture in evening light. The shepherd is not in this one. A young couple is, with a thermos and 2 ceramic cups. The hook, drilled in 1979, is empty now. The canvas bag is on the ground beside them. The dog is asleep. The country has 173,000 of these bunkers. They are still where the regime put them. The youngest were poured 40 years ago. The oldest were poured nearly 60. A black double-headed eagle on a red ground flies above the headland at Ksamil. The hook holds. The country has somewhere else to be. Poured nearly 60.